Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Well, currently we are looking at the fifth commandment. This is a command to honor your father and mother. And really, this is a unique commandment amongst the 10, in that the Lord has provided a little persuasive incentive for us to engage fully this commandment. It's what Paul would call a promise. And the whole concept of this is if we honor our mother and father, then we will live long on the earth. I call that incredible incentive. I call that motivation. Well, today we're going to continue to dig into this commandment because there is a whole world of understanding. There's a whole world to be discovered in regard to what it means to honor mom and dad when you go to the Word. And this is the beauty of the Word. As we go to the Word on this particular subject and just peel back layer after layer, what's going to happen is we're going to be given more and more perspective. And with more perspective, guess what? Comes greater understanding, comes greater clarity, comes greater motivation, comes greater strength to actually engage with this commandment so that we actually walk it out. From the youngest children to our teens, to our young adults, to even us who have parents still living today. And so with that said, to kick things off today, I really want to begin with what I would call the perfect example, the ultimate example, the ultimate template. And what I mean by that is Yeshua. Who better to draw from in regard to his teachings? Who better to draw from in regard to his example that he has set for us? There is no one greater. And so today we're gonna spend some time looking at Yeshua, at his actions, looking at his teachings. And I actually want to begin today by taking you to Luke chapter 2. And there, the backdrop of Luke chapter 2 is Yeshua's family had gone up to Jerusalem during the feast of Passover. Remember, it's a pilgrimage feast. There are 3 pilgrimage feasts of Shavuot and Passover, and then, of course, Sukkot. And they had gone up for Passover, and upon the expiration of this, the festival's over. They now make their way home to Nazareth. Now, keep in mind, Nazareth is a 3-day journey. It's going to take them three days. It's about some 80 miles. It's going to take them 3 days to get home. They're already 1/3 of the way home. And then they realize, we're missing one of our kids. Now, I know that happens to some people, for real. And it's scary, but think about this back in the day, and you really do need to put yourself in this situation because, there's a danger of when we read Scripture, we don't take the time to put ourselves in the positions of these people, and we lose so much. Could you imagine parents being 1/3 of the way home on a 3-day journey and then realizing, where's our son? Where's our firstborn? So they make their way back to Jerusalem, and they need to find their kid, and this is what we read. In Luke chapter 2, verse 46, now it was that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. Think about this for a second. 3 days. They were already 1/3 of the way home. That's a day. Took them a day to get back, and they spent, obviously, a good part of the day. We don't know exactly how much of the day. This is now the 3rd day. What state do you think these parents are in right now? Yeah, totally insane. They're past consolable, if you will. Moving to verse 47, we read this. And all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. So when they saw him, they were amazed, and his mother said to him, Son, why have you done this to us? Look, your father and I have sought you anxiously. Yeah, I understand where Mary's coming from. I understand the frustration. I understand the terror, because I can tell you right now, Joseph and Mary haven't slept in days. There's no way. With the concern for their son, there's no way they slept. And so they've probably on no sleep, 3 days, no sleep. And here she comes. What is going on here? And we continue. And he said to them, Why did you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" But they did not understand the statement which he spoke to them. And here's where we get to the point, verse 51. "Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth." Oh, and listen to this. "Was subject to them." Hupatasso in the Greek. And that hupa means under. Yeshua brought himself under the authority of his parents. Now think about this. We have the one who is called King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the great I am, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the one who is called literally the Word of the Lord, the one who is called the Savior of the world, the one we are told that every knee will bow in heaven and on earth. And yet he found it necessary to submit to his earthly parents. You know, you want to talk about an example. If Yeshua is setting this example as the Son of the living God, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he submitted to the authority of his earthly parents, how much more should we? I mean, talk about incentive, talk about motivation, talk about clarity and perspective and reason for us to grab hold of. That is an incredible thought. And then think about the alternative. And I wish I had what I'm giving today. I wish I had this when I was a kid so that I could think about these things and think rationally and logically with spiritual clarity. Think about the fact, what are you saying when you say, I don't have to listen to mom and dad? I mean, you have to ask yourself, well, who do you think you are? Because even the Son of the living God, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, thought no such thing. That's an incredible perspective. Kids, next time you find it hard to listen to mom and dad, remember Yeshua. And remember what he did. The greatest example we have. I want to build on this, and I want to jump to the book of John and get into the teachings of Yeshua. And this is what we read. Yeshua said to them, "When you lift up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, that I do nothing of myself, but as my Father taught me, I speak these things. And he who sent me is with me. The Father has not left me alone." Now listen, "for I always do those things that please him." You know, if looking at Yeshua and the example that he is, the ultimate example for all of us, we can't just look at how he interacted with his earthly parents. We need to look at also how he interacted with his Father, his literal Father in heaven. And we need to glean from that, because there's much to take away from that to understand that we can practically implement to our earthly parents here. And let's start with this statement that I have highlighted. I always do the things that please him. Yeshua, as a son, always honored his Father. He always chose to please him, which means that his life was not about pleasing himself. He was not, his purpose in Yeshua's life was not to gratify his own desires or to accomplish his own agenda. At the top, what mattered most to him was pleasing his Father. I mean, he is displaying here a complete selflessness. He's displaying integrity and honor. And we need to take this reality in our lives. We need to take this character of our Messiah, and we need to apply that in how we treat our parents and how we interact with mom and dad. We need to have the mindset that, you know what, as a son or as a daughter, you know what, the number one thing that I'm concerned about is honoring you, mom and dad. I want to make sure that I please you, that I bring joy to you, that I obey you, because in doing so, we are obeying our Father in heaven. We are pleasing him. John chapter 12, verse 49. "I have not spoken on my own authority, but the Father who sent me gave me a command, what I should say and what I should speak." And so here we see the Father, Yeshua, makes this very clear. The Father gives Yeshua instructions. There are certain things that the Father has to say to him and does say to him, certain things he commands him, and certain things he wants him to convey. How does Yeshua respond to the instruction? Yeshua responds by doing those things that his Father has said. And when the Father says, hey, I want to make sure that you convey this message, Yeshua does it. He's completely in the mode of this is all about obedience to the Father. Now, I want you to think about something, knowing that Yeshua was perfect in this capacity. What's the impact of his actions? I mean, you want to talk about how do you calculate the impact? Number one, start with this. Multiple times, the voice of the Father is heard, literally, in the New Testament. The first time we get this in the Gospel of Matthew, as John the Baptizer, Yeshua comes to him to be baptized, and then all of a sudden the Holy Spirit descends, and a voice out of heaven, which is the Father, speaks, says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." The Father declared what he thought of his Son before men. He did it again in Matthew 17. It's interesting. Peter, James, and John witnessed this. As they went up on the Mount of Transfiguration and Yeshua was transfigured before them, that same voice came out and said the exact same thing. "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." The impact of Yeshua's obedience was he brought joy. He brought incredible rejoicing to the Father. That is huge. But not just that, his obedience to the Father brought salvation to the world. Catastrophic, it's just incredible impact that you can't even measure. It's no different, kids, when you choose to honor mom and dad. Things happen, both in the spiritual realm and they're manifested in the physical realm. Proverbs 23:24 says, "The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice." Not a little bit. He's not like, "Oh yeah, that's kind of interesting, son." No, he will greatly rejoice, and he who begets a wise child will delight in him. And this is what it's about. This is what we want to read about. This is who you want to be. You want your mother and father rejoicing over you. To be able to, when other people come into the room, it's amazing. I love it when you see parents so proud of their children for doing such amazing things, for walking with the Lord, for treating other people with respect and kindness, including their own parents. It's an amazing thing to see parents do that. And just recently, and I'll keep this brief, but just recently I went over and I had a funeral I had to attend to. My grandmother passed away, and my mom was talking to a bunch of people, and I had come over, and my mom just started going off about, this is my son, and blah, 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 and he's this and that's that. He's been there for me always, and he encourages me, and he comforts me. And she's just going on, and I just left because I didn't want to be a part of that. But the thing about it is I've brought my mother great comfort. I have brought my mom joy in times as she was hurting. And that is the gospel. That is the faith. That's where we need to be at, where our parents have that response to their children. Next verse, we read this: "Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice." You could put that literally right on top of honor your mother and father, that your father and mother may be glad. There's an impact. Kids, do you understand it? And I'm talking to you youngest children, I'm talking to you young teens, old teens, young adults. Do you understand the power that you have in your house? The power to create an incredible environment of rejoicing. A power to bring peace and shalom into the house. You yield that power. You wield shall I say, that power. Or, if I continue, you have a decision. You can wield it or you can yield it. Because the alternative to that, instead of bringing peace and shalom and strength and honor into your house, which you can do as children, you can bring chaos and you can bring pain and you can bring sorrow and you can make your parents grieve. You can tear a house apart. And I've seen it. I have seen one child tear an entire family apart to make the entire family mourn. And what was leading the charge? Rebellion. That led the charge. This is an incredible, I mean, it's almost mystifying to me to see the power that kids wield, that children, sons and daughters have in their own homes. Be very careful how you wield that power. It's very, very scary in the alternative. And to see the work of the devil go through a house and to see that kind of suffering, it's awful. Proverbs 10, verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon, a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the grief of his mother. Last week we read about in Proverbs 17, it talks about a foolish son is the grief of his father, mother and father. Grief and sorrow. I want to take you to Matthew 26. And in this chapter, we're going to see the extent that Yeshua was willing to go to honor his Father. And I'm going to tell you this. This entire conversation about honoring mom and dad is put into context right here. Check this out, Matthew 26, verse 36. Then Yeshua came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, sit here while I go and pray over there. And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, James and John. And he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Yeshua is moved. He's in agony right now. We continue. Then he said to them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful. How sorrowful? Even to death. Even to death. In other words, Yeshua is way past overwhelmed. He is feeling something here that he has never felt before in his life. He is feeling the full weight of the sin of the world bearing down upon him right here. The full weight of the horrifying persecution and the torment that the Father is calling him to endure. The pain, he knows the pain and the suffering, the mocking and the scourging that is just around the corner. And do you know what? It's getting to him. This is getting to him. I mean, what we are seeing right here, it's one of the most intense and unique moments ever recorded in Scripture. Not hyperbole. And to help you appreciate just how intense this moment was, listen to what Yeshua says next. This is incredible. And he went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." This is not a misprint. This is not a bad translation. In fact, Yeshua doesn't pray this once. He doesn't pray it twice. Yeshua prays this prayer 3 times. And he is crying out, he is asking, Father, is there another way? If there's any other way, I want it. I desire another way. Man, right here, you understand what the writer of Hebrews is talking about when he says in chapter 4 that we do not have a high priest that cannot sympathize with us, but was in all points tempted as we are. That means because the Word became flesh, he became flesh, and all those feelings and emotions that you have struggled with in life, the pain, the sorrow, the feelings of betrayal, the fear. Yeshua is feeling it. He's feeling it in full measure right now. But here's the thing, you want to talk about honor. This is not the end of his prayer. He ends the prayer with this. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Think about that. That's how he ends it. If it's possible, take this from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will. For Yeshua truly to obey his Father, he had to override his will. For Yeshua to obey the Father, he had to go to war. He had to go to war against his flesh. He had to go to war against the lies of Hasatan, certainly whispering into his ears. He had to go to war against the fear. I'm going to tell you something right now, kids. For you to obey mom and dad truly, you're going to have to go to war. You're going to have to fight your flesh. You're going to have to fight the lies. You're going to have to fight the frustration. You're going to have to fight the anger. And you're going to have to get on your knees and you're going to have to pray what Yeshua prayed. Not my will, but your will be done. Because for you to submit to mom and dad is for you to submit to the holy will of our Father in heaven. That is an awesome reality. And Paul picks up on this in Philippians 2. I want to build on this. And Paul says, in being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself. And I want to interrupt this mid-sentence because I want you to understand that for you to truly fulfill the commandment to honor your mother and father, or any other commandment for that matter, you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to understand what humility is. You're going to have to embrace this whole concept of humility because we're told in Proverbs, before honor is humility. I will never get to honor without grabbing hold of humility. Whereas pride comes before the fall. And so this is where the sheep and the goats are separated. This is where a kid has, the fork in the road. I can go the rebellious route. I can give in to this. And of course, there's destruction in my future, and not including the pain and the suffering and the agony you're going to bring into your home. Or I can humble myself and know that that's going to lead to honor. I, through humility, will honor my mother and father. In turn, my parents will honor me. They will be pleased with me. That is a cool thing to think about. But then Paul, after saying this, he humbled himself. Listen to this. He goes on and says, and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Yeshua was so committed to the cause of obeying, submitting to his Father's will, he was literally willing to lose it all, including his own life, willing to give his own life. That is the ultimate example. That is the ultimate example of how we, the diligence, the commitment that we need to have for the cause of honoring mom and dad. And you might say, well, Daniel, that was Yeshua and he was dying for the sins of the world. Well, hold on a second. We have other examples. What about Isaac? A man, flesh, just like me and you. Wasn't called the Son of God. Yes, he's a prophetic foreshadow. But think about that situation in Genesis 22. Abraham, look at the honor all over the place. Abraham is instructed by his Father in heaven, you're going to take your son, you're going to go sacrifice him as an olah on Mount Moriah, or what we would call today the Temple Mount. Take him up. Take him up to the Temple Mount and give me your son. You're going to sacrifice him. Abraham takes the fire, he takes the wood, and he takes the knife. And he goes with his son Isaac. Tells his two servants, sit here, I and the lad are going to go worship. Okay, so we're going to go do this. Now it's interesting, something's recorded very important in the text, that Abraham laid the wood on Isaac. And that's interesting because Yeshua, the wood was laid on him as he bore his cross to his own crucifixion. And this is literally what Isaac is doing. And keep in mind, Isaac is a young man. In fact, he's a man. He's strong. He is not a 4 or 5. He's not 10. He's not 12. He's bearing the wood. We know he's strong, and this is important to recognize because there's some different commentaries and different conversations in regard to how old was Isaac? How old was that guy? He is called a Na'ar in the Hebrew. In the text of Genesis 22, he's called a Na'ar. Well, this is what's interesting. Ishmael is called a Na'ar. And if you do the math, in the very passage Ishmael is called a Na'ar, he's 17 years old. Joseph, also in the book of Genesis, is called a Na'ar, and in the very passage he's called a Na'ar, we're told he's 17 years old. Isaac is a Na'ar. Estimated at least he's 17 years old, maybe a couple years older. He's a strong young man. And the reason this is important is the following. Abraham taking up his son, who, by the way, Isaac's like, well, Dad, where's the lamb? Where's the lamb for this offering? Don't worry about it, son. God's going to provide a lamb. Well, then you continue in the discourse, and next thing you know, Abraham is binding Isaac. It doesn't say he took a big club, conked him out behind the head, sucker punched him, so that he was out cold and he just never seen it coming. That's not what happened. He bound Isaac, put him on the altar. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, there is no way that Isaac ever got bound by a man who's at least 117, maybe 120 years old, Abraham, okay? When Isaac's in his prime of his life and his strength, there's no way he's going to be able to do that unless he was willing. He was so willing to champion the cause of honoring his father, Abraham, his earthly father, trusting in God's system. He had to trust in the Lord. I mean, think about that. For him to do what he did, he had to trust in the Lord. If I can trust in the Lord, I'm going to be able to honor my mother and father. I'll be able to champion that cause. That's an incredible story. That's an incredible story. Here's another one. Judges 11, verse 1, we read, Now Jephtha, or Jephtha the Gileadite, was a mighty man of valor. This is a Gibor Chayil. And it might sound familiar because the woman in Proverbs 31, she's called an Eshet Chayil. She's a woman of valor. Here, the first thing we're told about Jephtha, first thing, is he's a mighty man of valor. So we're getting an aspect about his character. But then it adds this. There's a stark contrast immediately. He's a mighty man of valor, but he was the son of a harlot. And Gilead begot Jephtha. Verse 2, you're going to see how that son of a harlot comes into play here. Gilead's wife bore sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephtha out and said to him, You shall have no inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. Or as we learned earlier, as a harlot. You're the son of a harlot. So here you have these Gileadites, they're literally pushing him out. They're to be out. And, why would they do that? Well, they may be standing on Deuteronomy 23. They may be looking at which Deuteronomy 23 says that one born of illegitimate birth, and it was called a mamzer in Hebrew, is not to enter into the assembly of the Lord. Now, may they be looking at Deuteronomy 23 and looking at the Torah and say, yeah, you know what? He's the son of a woman of an illegitimate birth. And we're driving him out. Whether that is the case, that they're attempting to fulfill Torah or not, the event happened. Verse 3, Then Jephtha fled from his brothers and dwelt in the land of Tob, and worthless men banded together with Jephtha and went out raiding with him. Now here's the thing, as time goes on, something interesting happens. A people rise up against Israel, the Ammonites. And they want to go to Israel, they want to go to war with Israel. They want their land back, which God so rightfully took from them and gave to Israel. But they want their land back. They're upset. And so, interesting turn of events happens where, Jephthah's brothers, They come back to him and say, we want you to come back home. We want you back. And they didn't just want him to come back home. They wanted Jephtha to be their leader, to lead them in battle, their commander. They wanted him. And as irony would have it, Jephtha agrees. He agrees to do this. And at which point he opens up these communications with the Ammonites, hopefully being able to settle this peaceably. Never happens. The Ammonites aren't going to have it. So there's going to be war. And this is what we read. This is where we get into this story. We're going to drop down to verse 30. And Jephtha made a vow, now listen to this, to the Lord. That is the tetragrammaton. That's Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. This is significant to the entire story, so you got to stay with me. He's not making a vow to a pagan god. He's making a vow explicitly to the God of Israel, and only the God of Israel. And so he made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the people of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. Now you have no idea how this passage and this story has created so much controversy and so many discussions and so many debates. A lot of commentators look at Jephthah's vow, and some even refer to it as the Jephthah's infamous vow. They see it as extremely foolish, an extremely foolish move. Some commentators actually go to the extent where they're actually tell you what Jephtha was doing was mixing the holy with the profane. Because Jephthah's whole point of saying whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, in other words, some people would say, well, he knew a person would come out. People argue that he wasn't thinking about cattle, or he wasn't thinking about something from his flock, a goat or a sheep or something, as though I'm going to offer this up as an olah. No, he was thinking of a person. And Jephtha was polluted and infected by all the nations that were living in the land during the day that very much believed in human sacrifice. And so there's a lot of different, really, what I would say, very off and corrupt thoughts in regard to this story. And it really begins right here on what is Jephtha thinking? What is his intent? Number one, we know this. Jephtha is praying. This vow that he's making, it's through prayer. Jephtha is praying to the one true God. That's the first thing. And in this vow, he makes the terms, interestingly enough, whatever comes out of my house and meets me first, I will give it to you. I will offer that up. Here's a thought that is very important. Could it be that Jephtha, to honor the Lord, is allowing the Lord to select what he wants and how he wants to be honored and giving it to him? Think about that. Because that's a reality of the text that actually, as we continue to see, you'll appreciate more. Now, moving to verse 32. So Yephtha advanced toward the people of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. This is not a different God. It wasn't Baal. It wasn't Chemosh. It wasn't any other God. It was Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. It was the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What does this tell you? Right here, you have to stop. God heard Jephthah's prayer. And you want to talk about, what does Scripture say? All who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. Jephtha called upon the name of the Lord. The Lord received his prayer. And we know this because it is the Lord that gave him deliverance. It is explicit right here. So the Lord answers the prayer, gives victory. Now dropping down to verse 34. When Yephtha came to his house at Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and dancing, and she was his only child. because besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. And obviously, the fact that the writer is taking the time to articulate this is to emphasize Jephthah's connection in his love to his only child. And for you parents, I don't think it's very hard for you to get there. I don't think that's something difficult for you to understand how much we love our children, how precious they are. In verse 35, and it came to pass when he saw her that he tore his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me. For I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it." Now here's what's interesting. It is clear Jephtha was not thinking about his daughter. Let's start there for a second. He was not thinking, it never entered his mind that this one would be the one that would be selected, that he would have to offer up. And what was Jephtha thinking? We can speculate. Maybe Jephtha was thinking that, there are people that develop bonds with their flock. And when they come, that flock comes running. They come running. It's possible. Could it be possible that he maybe even was thinking about a servant? Probably more so than thinking about his daughter. Because the text is very clear. This was not in his mind, and now he's beside himself. And this is where we get to the point of the story. Mind-blowing. How does Jephthah's daughter respond? When Jephtha tells him the terms that he's made with the Lord through this vow, the vow that he's done, does his daughter come out in raging anger, berating her father and say, "You idiot, what were you thinking? How could you possibly do this to me? This is absolutely awful. You didn't even think about me. You don't even care about me." There are so many ways that Jephthah's daughter could have responded negatively and coming out and berating him. But does she do that? This is her response. Listen to this, kids. This is the response for a daughter who honors her father. And she said to him, "My father, if you have given your word to the Lord, do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, because the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the people of Ammon." One of the greatest examples we have anywhere in Scripture of someone actually walking out the command to honor their mother and father with integrity and to honor their Father in heaven. I look at this response of this young girl, and I know everything I need to know about her. Because I can tell you right now, this woman has the fear of the living God. Her concern is that the word that Jephtha, her father, has given to the Lord is fulfilled. She's concerned about what the Lord thinks, and she's concerned and loves her father. And she wants this to go well, even at her own expense. This is at her own expense. This is a completely selfless act. We continue, verse 37. Then she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Let me alone for 2 months, that I may go and wander on the mountains and bewail my virginity. My friends and I." Daughters that really disrespect their father, they would have said, "Let me leave for 2 months and never come home to fulfill this." And they would have turned their back on their father and just said, "I don't care what the Lord does to him. I'm not going to be a part of this. You're not going to ruin my life because of what you said to the Lord." She doesn't do that. She doesn't do that at all. And so the response here is, he said, "Go." And he sent her away for 2 months. And she went with her friends and bewailed her virginity on the mountains. And it was so at the end of 2 months that she returned to her father, just as she said she would. And he carried out his vow with her, which he had vowed. She knew no man, and it became a custom in Israel. Now you look at that, that is an incredible thing. Absolutely incredible. And let me just briefly deal with the controversy here for a moment, because this is something I've had to talk about, and I can't go here without addressing it, though it doesn't have as much to do with our topic. And that controversy is did Jephtha sacrifice? Did he slit his daughter's throat? Did he lay her upon an altar, slit her throat? Did he burn her body as an olah, as a burnt offering? And I'm going to answer that right up on front, no. And this is a passage that is hotly debated, but I want you to consider some things before we round this out. Number one, child sacrifice is one of the things that is mentioned in Torah that is an absolute abomination to God. He comes out in Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, he comes out in Deuteronomy 18, and tells the children of Israel, don't you dare do this. At the end of Deuteronomy 12, he warns them, don't you dare take on the practices of the nations and do that to me. And that's what they did. They offered up their children. They would sacrifice their children. Not just infants, but grown children. They would offer them up. God hates that. So you have a problem right on immediately in looking at what is going on here, because this is everything against the character and nature of God. And also consider this. Did God allow Abraham, even when he commanded Abraham to go sacrifice his son, did he allow him to go through with it? No. Do you really think that the angel is going to hold back the knife of Abraham sacrificing Isaac and not hold it back in regard to this young girl? If that's the context that you're looking at this in, that's really, really problematic. The other problematic thing is understanding the sacrifices that were acceptable before the Lord. Slide the child sacrifice thing totally out of the picture for a moment. Specifically, Leviticus 22 talks about the vow offerings, a sacrifice when you make a vow. You know what it says there? It's explicit. It has to be perfect. It has to be without blemish, or God would not accept it. And one thing I can tell you is this: I've read enough of the Bible to know that for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. There is only one who is without blemish, and that's why he died for us. He was a sinless, spotless lamb. And so do we really think that God would have accepted this sacrifice? Absolutely not. It wouldn't have been a perfect sacrifice. The other thing is notice what she's bewailing in the story. So Jephtha tells her vow. Most kids, and we don't know how old she is, but we can estimate she's in her teens. Most teens are well enough to know that if their father just sentenced them to death, oh yeah, I'm going to slice you with the knife, I'm going to sacrifice you on an altar, and you're going to be a burnt offering. They would actually go out and not lament their virginity. They're lamenting their death. They wouldn't lament their virginity. They would be worried about, I'm going to lose my life. And look at the last thing. Look at how this ends here. Let me highlight this. And he carried out his vow with her, which he had vowed. She knew no man. It doesn't say, and he put her on the altar and killed her. It says, she knew no man. And, and I can also, we could go on talking about this, but there's a similar vow that Hannah made. And in that vow, she said, Lord, if you give me a male child, I will give him to you. So what ends up happening to this male child? She dedicated the child to the Lord. And once he was weaned, he was gone. He was totally dedicated to the Lord. And she didn't get to have him. That's a reality. And so you see a similar thing going on here. But the point of the story that we want to take away in regard to honoring mom and dad is looking at the response of this girl, champion the cause as Isaac championed the cause, willing to lose everything for the sake of honoring her father, just as Isaac was willing to, and honoring his father. That is an awesome perspective. You want to talk about humbling. I mean, when you go to Scripture and you start analyzing this command of what it means to honor mom and dad, man, it puts you in a completely different world. With that said, we're going to close in